Imagine this. Your daughter goes missing over Thanksgiving break. A few days later, her borrowed minivan turns up, but she's vanished without a trace. That horrifying scenario became reality for the Butler family back in 2016. Today, we're diving deep into the case of Khalil Wheeler Weaver, the man ultimately convicted of murdering their daughter, Sarah Butler, and two other women. What makes this case particularly chilling is that it wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about confronting a system that seemed to fail these women at every turn.
What's so compelling about this case is that it's a stark reminder of how easily a predator can blend into society. On the surface, Khalil Wheeler Weaver was a seemingly average young man, but beneath that facade lurked a dangerous mind.
Right. And as we unpack this case, we'll see how his digital footprint became a trail of breadcrumbs, leading investigators to the truth. But before we get into the technical details, let's go back to the beginning. Sarah Butler, a 20-year-old college student, disappears after borrowing her family's minivan. A few days later, the van is found. But there's no sign of Sarah. Initially, her family fears the worst, thinking maybe there's been an accident.
But then a small detail emerges that changes everything. A hair extension belonging to Sarah is found near the van. This seemingly insignificant discovery shifts the focus from a missing person to a potential crime scene.
And this discovery really ignites Sarah's sister, Basanya, and her friends to take action. They're not content to just sit around and wait for answers. They decide to launch their own investigation, focusing on Sarah's social media activity.
This is where their tech savviness really comes into play. They start combing through Sarah's messages on a dating app called Tagged and uncover a conversation with a user named Lil Yacht Rock. He had offered Sarah money for sex, and they had planned to meet on the night she disappeared.
So Bisanya and her friends decide to take a huge risk. They create a fake profile on Tagged, hoping to lure Lil Yacht Rock into contacting them. It's a risky move, but they're desperate for answers. And to their surprise, he takes the bait almost immediately.
Their proactive approach is remarkable. They understood the urgency of the situation and were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to find answers. It highlights a recurring theme we'll see throughout this case: individuals stepping up when traditional systems seem to falter.
Working with the police, they arrange a meeting with Lil Yacht Rock. And that's when they finally get a name to go with the username: Khalil Wheeler Weaver. But as the investigation unfolds, his story starts to unravel, and the digital trail he leaves behind becomes increasingly incriminating.
This is where the investigation takes a technological turn. Khalil initially denies any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, claiming he dropped her off safely. However, his alibi falls apart under the scrutiny of cell phone records and geolocation data.
Right, investigators used cell tower data to pinpoint Khalil's location at various times, and it contradicted his story completely. Instead of being where he claimed, the data placed him at the location where Sarah's body was later found. And as if that wasn't enough, they also uncovered some very disturbing searches on his phone about making homemade poisons. It quickly became clear that they weren't dealing with a simple missing persons case.
The digital evidence starts to paint a very different picture of Khalil. His carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbles under the weight of the data. This case highlights the growing importance of digital forensics in modern investigations.
So it's like a modern-day fingerprint, isn't it? Our online activity, our searches, our movements, they all leave a trace. And in this case, Khalil's digital footprint ultimately helped lead to his capture. But what's even more unsettling is that Sarah's case wasn't the only one that had ties to Khalil. Investigators soon discovered a chilling connection to another unsolved murder.
This is where the case takes an even darker turn. Newark police realized that Sarah's disappearance bears striking similarities to the unsolved murder of Joanne Brown, a sex worker who had vanished just weeks earlier.
And here's where we see the first signs of a major systemic failure. It turns out that a friend of Joanne's had actually given the police Khalil's phone number at the time of her disappearance. But for some reason, that lead was never followed up on.
This missed opportunity is a crucial turning point in the case. It raises serious questions about how thoroughly the initial investigation was conducted and whether biases played a role in the lack of follow-up. Remember, Joanne was a sex worker, a community often marginalized and overlooked by law enforcement.
And tragically, this wasn't the only instance where a potential victim tried to warn the authorities about Khalil. As the investigation progressed, another woman bravely came forward with a terrifying story that could have changed everything. But we'll delve into that harrowing account in the next part of our deep dive.
As we delve deeper into this case, we encounter a story so harrowing. It's hard to believe it didn't immediately raise every red flag imaginable. Just a week before Sarah Butler's murder, Another woman, Tiffany Taylor, had a terrifying encounter with Khalil Wheeler Weaver.
And her experience really underscores the systemic failures. That allowed Khalil to continue preying on women. Tiffany, who had also connected with Khalil online, agreed to meet him. But what started as a seemingly normal encounter quickly turned into a nightmare.
Tiffany described being choked, bound, and driven to a remote location. She was certain she was going to die. But in a moment of desperation, she managed to escape while Khalil's guard was down.
Can you imagine the terror she must have felt? And then, to make matters even worse, when she went to the police to report the attack, she was met with disbelief and skepticism.
This is perhaps the most devastating aspect of the entire case. Tiffany's report, despite the clear evidence of a violent assault, was dismissed by the very people who were supposed to protect her.
It's just mind-boggling to think that her story wasn't taken seriously. She had escaped a near-death experience, and the police just brushed it off.
Unfortunately, this type of response is not uncommon, especially when it involves marginalized individuals like Tiffany, who is a Black woman and a former sex worker. These systemic biases often lead to victims' voices being silenced and their experiences being minimized.
It's heartbreaking to think that if they had listened to Tiffany, if they had investigated her claims thoroughly, they might have been able to connect Khalil to her attack and potentially prevent the murders of Sarah Butler and Joanne Brown.
It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the information needed to prevent a tragedy is right there, but for various reasons. It's ignored or overlooked. The consequences of those oversights can be devastating.
So while the police were failing to connect these crucial dots, Khalil was busy trying to cover his tracks. But even as he tried to maintain a facade of innocence, his digital footprint was steadily revealing the truth.
Right, as the investigation progressed, the digital evidence against Khalil became overwhelming. His cell phone records, geolocation data, and internet search history all contradicted his claims and painted a very clear picture of his involvement in these crimes.
It's amazing how much information we leave behind in the digital age, isn't it? Every click, every search, every location ping, it all adds up to create a digital trail that can be incredibly revealing.
Absolutely. And this case really highlights the power of digital forensics in modern investigations. It's a tool that can be used to uncover the truth, even when a perpetrator tries to hide it.
But even with all of this evidence mounting against him, it's important to remember that the victims' families, especially Sarah's sister Basania, played a pivotal role in pushing for justice. They refused to let the case go cold and kept the pressure on the authorities to find answers.
Their persistence and dedication were remarkable. They didn't just wait for the system to work. They actively participated in the investigation, raising awareness and demanding accountability.
It's a testament to the power of community and the unwavering love of family. They were determined to get justice for their loved ones, and they played a crucial role in ensuring that Khalil was ultimately held accountable for his crimes.
And eventually, Khalil Wheeler Weaver was brought to trial, facing charges for the murders of Sarah Butler, Joanne Brown, and another woman named Robin West, whose body was found burned in an abandoned house. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Tiffany Taylor. The prosecution built a strong case, relying heavily on the mountain of digital evidence that had been collected.
It sounds like the digital trail he left behind was essentially his undoing.
Yeah.
But what about the defense? Did they have any arguments in his favor?
Interestingly, the defense tried to downplay the significance of the digital evidence, claiming it was all circumstantial. They argued that there was no direct proof linking Khalil to the murders, only a series of coincidences.
So basically they were trying to say it was all just a big misunderstanding.
In essence, yes. But the jury wasn't convinced. They saw through the defense's attempts to create reasonable doubt and ultimately found Khalil guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 160 years in prison, a sentence that reflected the severity of his crimes and the lasting impact they had on the victims' families and communities.
It sounds like justice was finally served. But as is often the case with these deep dives, there's always another layer, another twist that complicates the narrative. And in this case, the story didn't end with Khalil's conviction.
You're absolutely right. Years after Khalil was behind bars, a chilling discovery brought his case back into the spotlight, revealing a horrifying truth that added another victim to the list and reopened old wounds. But we'll explore that shocking revelation in the final part of our deep dive.
We've been following this twisted path of Khalil Wheeler Weaver's crimes, a digital trail of deceit and violence. He was convicted and sentenced to 160 years, seemingly bringing a sense of closure to the families of his victims. But this case, as we've learned, is full of unsettling turns.
What's truly chilling is that even with Wheeler Weaver behind bars, the full scope of his crimes remained hidden for years. This wasn't just a case closed, it was a chapter, left unfinished.
In 2019, the skeletal remains of a young woman were discovered in an abandoned building initially. She was unidentified, another Jane Doe in a system, often overwhelms such cases.
But advancements in forensic technology, specifically DNA analysis, allowed investigators to finally put a name to those remains in 2021. The victim was 15-year-old Mawa Dumbia, who had vanished in 2016, the same year Sarah Butler and Joanne Brown were murdered.
It's horrifying to think that while Wheeler Weaver was standing trial for the murders of 3 women, another victim's remains lay unidentified, her story tragically intertwined with his.
And once Malwa was identified, investigators wasted no time in connecting the dots back to Wheeler Weaver. They used the same tools that had proven so effective in the previous cases: cell phone records, geolocation data, and digital footprints.
And, just like with Sarah and Joanne, the data placed Wheeler Weaver right where Mawa's body was found. It was undeniable proof that he had been involved in her disappearance and death.
In 2022, already serving a life sentence, Wheeler Weaver was charged with Malwa's murder. This case, already a testament to the power of digital forensics, became an even stronger example of how technology can help bring justice, even years after a crime has been committed.
It's both remarkable and incredibly sad. Remarkable that technology helped solve this case, but heartbreaking that another young life was taken by this predator. Really highlights the importance of never giving up on these cold cases.
Absolutely. And it also underscores the need for continuous advancements in forensic science. Who knows how many other cases out there could be solved, how many families could get answers if we keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with DNA analysis and digital investigation techniques.
This case has been a roller coaster of emotions. Anger at the systemic failures, sadness for the victims, a touch of hope seeing the families fight for justice, and then this final gut punch of discovering another victim.
It's a lot to process, and I think what stays with me is not just the horror of Wheeler Weaver's actions, but the bravery of the victims' families, particularly by Sonny Butler, who never stopped seeking justice for her sister.
Their strength and determination are truly inspiring. And their story is a reminder that we can't just sit back and wait for the system to work. We have to be active participants in demanding justice, in holding those in power accountable, and in fighting for a world where these tragedies are less likely to occur.
That's a powerful message to end on. This deep dive has been a difficult one, but it's so important to engage with these tough topics, to learn from these cases, and to work towards a future where everyone feels safe and protected.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the case of Khalil Wheeler Weaver. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and the systems that are supposed to protect us. As always, we encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.